Every year, more than 250,000 Americans die from a cause that never shows up on a standard autopsy report. It is not a pathogen, a genetic defect, or a sudden physical trauma. Researchers call them deaths of despair, fatalities driven directly by drug overdoses, alcohol abuse, and suicide. To put that number into perspective, 264,000 people annually is the equivalent of a fully loaded commercial airliner falling out of the sky every single day, 365 days a year. If passenger planes were dropping at that rate, the entire aviation infrastructure would be grounded by noon on day one. There would be military mobilizations, continuous emergency broadcasts, and immediate congressional interventions. But when this destruction happens to the internal architecture of the human mind, it is treated as background noise. It is just the accepted cost of living in the modern world. But those 264,000 individuals are merely the tip of the spear. Beneath that acute lethal layer lies a far vaster, much more terrifying reality, a massive, quiet ocean of people who have not died, but who have simply stopped living. They are the walking functional. You see them every morning on the interstate, sitting in mid-sized sedans, staring through clean windshields with eyes that are not looking at anything at all. You see them in corporate offices, typing out emails that mean nothing to them, for companies they do not care about, to secure money that is already spent before it even hits their accounts. They are not throwing bricks through windows or screaming in the streets. They are quietly, methodically, and completely pulling the plug on their own lives. The most disturbing part of this entire phenomenon is that you probably know exactly what this feels like. You have felt that heavy, flat, grey weight that settles over a weekend when you have absolutely nothing to do. It is not sadness. Sadness has an edge to it. Sadness means you still possess the capacity to feel the lack of something. This is different. This is a profound, echoing emptiness where your desires used to live. It is the moment someone asks you what you want to do with your evening, and your honest response, the one you hide behind a polite shrug, is that you do not know and you do not care, and those two statements feel identical. You still show up to the office, you still pay the bills, you still function perfectly. You are just entirely absent from your own existence. For decades, clinical psychology lacked a precise name for this specific twilight zone. It sits directly in the blind spot between mental health and clinical illness. It is called languishing. If depression is a valley and well-being is a peak, languishing is the endless, featureless desert that stretches between them. It is the stagnation of the soul. When the concept first entered the public mainstream, the consensus among experts was that this was a temporary side effect of a global crisis. The theory was simple: lock people in their homes, cut off their social circles, flood them with uncertainty, and their minds will naturally flatline. The underlying promise was that once the world reopened, the fog would lift and the color would return to the canvas. But that is not what happened. The world reopened, the factories spun back up, the airports packed out, and yet the fog only grew denser. By 2026, the data has defied every optimistic projection. Half of the American workforce has quietly quit. They have not resigned, they just stopped trying. They do the absolute bare minimum required to avoid being fired, treating their daily labor like a hostage situation where they trade just enough compliance to buy back another day of survival. More than half of all adults report feeling completely isolated from the people living under their own roof. Consumer confidence has cratered to depths typically reserved for wartime recessions. Even while macroeconomic indicators boast about record corporate profits, this is the great paradox of our era. We are living in a society that has perfected the art of delivering convenience, entertainment, and material abundance directly to our doorsteps within hours. We possess immediate digital access to every piece of music ever recorded, every book ever written, and every human being we have ever met. Yet, the collective response to this utopia of access is a profound, shuddering indifference. Americans are losing interest in everything: their jobs, their hobbies, their friendships, and their futures. The conventional narrative will tell you that this is a personal failure. It will tell you that you need to meditate more, drink more water, change your sleep hygiene, or download a new productivity app. It turns a systemic collapse into an individual chore list. But the conventional narrative is lying to you. This mass extraction of human interest was not an accident. It was not an unforeseen mutation of the American psyche. It is the logical, mathematically predictable outcome of an environment designed from the ground up to strip you of your agency. It was produced by design. Because a population that has stopped caring, a population that is too tired to hope and too numb to rage, is the most profitable, most compliant, and easiest population in the world to control. The open question is not whether you are trapped inside this machine. The question is how much of your life is left before it finishes draining the rest. To understand how the American psyche reached this point of profound exhaustion, it is necessary to examine the concrete legal, economic, and structural decisions made over the last several decades. This is not a vague cultural shift. It is the direct result of a geographic and economic trap engineered through specific legislation, corporate consolidation, and urban planning models that systematically dismantled the foundations of community and financial stability. The structural erosion began in earnest during the late 20th century. In 1978, the United States Supreme Court handed down a landmark decision in Marquette National Bank of Minneapolis v. First of Omaha Service Corp. This ruling effectively deregulated credit card interest rates, allowing national banks to export the usury laws of their home states across the entire country. It opened the floodgates for predatory lending practices. By removing the ceilings on interest rates, the financial sector began shifting its profit models from traditional commercial banking to debt extraction. Following this legal shift, the manufacturing base of the United States was systematically dismantled. The implementation of the North American Free Trade Agreement in January 1994 accelerated the offshoring of high-wage industrial jobs. Between 1997 and 2024, the United States lost over 5 million manufacturing jobs. According to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the stable single-earner household model, which had underpinned American civic life since the 1950s, concepts. In its place, the economy pivoted toward a service and gig economy characterized by low wages, erratic schedules, and a complete absence of institutional loyalty. Simultaneously, the physical landscape of the country was re-engineered. Throughout the post-war era, federal housing policies and highway subsidies heavily favored suburban sprawl over dense, walkable urban centers. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 funded the construction of 41,000 miles of interstate highways, permanently carving up American cities and segregating residential zones from commercial hubs. This car-dependent infrastructure created a distinct geographic trap. By the early 2000s, the average American worker spent over 200 hours per year commuting in total isolation inside a vehicle. The third places: community halls, walkable town squares, neighborhood diners, and local parks, where citizens historically gathered without the expectation of commercial transaction, were systematically replaced by strip malls, asphalt parking lots, and master-planned subdivisions completely devoid of civic infrastructure. As physical community space vanished, the financial architecture of basic survival underwent a massive contraction. The deregulation of the banking sector via the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act of 1999 triggered a wave of corporate mergers that consolidated the housing market. Following the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis, institutional private equity firms began buying up single-family homes en masse. According to data from real estate analytics firms, by 2024, institutional investors purchased nearly 30% of all homes sold in major metropolitan markets, driving housing prices far beyond the reach of the median wage earner. The financial numbers outlining this trap are clear and unyielding. Federal Reserve economic data from the first quarter of 2026 shows that total consumer debt in the United States has reached an unprecedented $18.19 trillion. Credit card debt alone accounts for $1.252 trillion of that total, with the average credit card interest rate climbing to an all-time high of 23.79%. The personal savings rate for American households has dropped to 4%, down from a historical average of approximately 8.5%. According to a 2025 consumer report by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, approximately 45% of all American households are unable to cover an unexpected $400 emergency expense using cash or its equivalent. This financial squeeze occurred alongside a rapid inflation of essential living costs. Bureau of Labor Statistics reports indicate that cumulative grocery prices have risen by more than 25% since 2020. The median rent for a one-bedroom apartment in the top 50 American metropolitan areas surpassed $1,700 per month in 2025. Annual premiums for employer-sponsored family health insurance reached an average of $24,000, while the average cost of center-based childcare climbed to between $15,000 and $25,000 per child annually. The consequences of these interlocking economic realities are not just financial, they are cognitive. In a definitive study published in the journal Science by researchers from Harvard University and Princeton University, data demonstrated that the mental bandwidth required to manage chronic financial scarcity reduces a person's effective cognitive capacity by 13 to 14 IQ points. The constant mathematical calculation of survival, deciding which utility bill to delay, calculating the cost of fuel required to reach a workplace, and managing minimum payments on revolving debt, utilizes the exact same prefrontal cortex resources required for long-term planning, emotional regulation, and creative focus. The history of this crisis is a history of fatal policy choices. The conversion of the American university system from a publicly subsidized goods structure into a high-interest debt engine via the privatization of student loans further locked subsequent generations into this trap. Total outstanding student loan debt reached $1.75 trillion by the mid-2020s, anchoring young adults to debt obligations before they even entered the workforce. The implicit social contract that governed American labor for nearly a century, the promise that hard work would yield financial stability, home ownership, and generational advancement, was quietly dissolved. What replaced it was a rigid, highly optimized system of economic extraction that leaves the median citizen with just enough resources to function as a unit of labor, but entirely spent of the cognitive energy required to participate in life outside of work. The systemic breakdown has progressed from a structural trap into an active crisis of institutional disengagement and neurological depletion across the United States. Federal, corporate, and public health reports from 2025 and 2026 outline a reality where core American institutions are experiencing a profound, unprecedented vacancy of human participation and emotional investment. At the center of this current crisis is the complete collapse of workplace engagement. According to a comprehensive 2025 workforce analytics report by the Gallup organization, only 33% of American workers describe themselves as actively engaged in their employment. The remaining 67% are either passively disengaged, a phenomenon commonly referred to in labor statistics as quiet quitting, or actively hostile to their employers. This disengagement is backed by a 2026 workplace psychological safety study that evaluated clinical data from over 100,000 corporate entities covering approximately 88 million employees. The investigation revealed that when asked if the daily output of their labor held any personal meaning, 2/3 of respondents answered in the negative. This corporate disengagement has directly collided with an aggressive push by federal authorities and corporate executives to mandate a return to physical offices. Throughout 2024 and 2025, major financial institutions and technology firms implemented strict 5-day in-office mandates, citing declining productivity metrics. However, data compiled by the National Bureau of Economic Research indicates that these mandates did not restore organizational loyalty or productivity. Instead, they exacerbated the allostatic load on the workforce. Employees subjected to rigid return-to-office orders reported a 40% increase in self-reported burnout and a significant reduction in discretionary effort. Turning the physical workplace into an arena of silent compliance, the withdrawal of human energy has expanded far beyond professional environments, destabilizing the country's social and civic foundations. Data from the Survey Center on American Life reveals that the percentage of Americans who report having no close personal friends has quadrupled since 1990, rising from 3% to 12%. Among single men, that metric reaches 20%. Traditional civic infrastructure has flatlined alongside these personal relationships. Church attendance, which hovered at 70% in 1999, fell to 45% by 2024 and has continued its downward trajectory into 2026. Labor union participation, civic club memberships, and neighborhood associations have all reached their lowest recorded levels since the Bureau of Labor Statistics began tracking them. This historical retreat from public life is directly linked to the rapid growth of the digital extraction economy. By 2026, the average American adult spends 2 hours and 31 minutes per day on social media platforms designed around variable ratio reinforcement algorithms. Neurobiological assessments published in the American Journal of Psychiatry demonstrate that these platforms trigger a continuous, unnatural release of dopamine, forcing the brain to reduce its density of dopamine receptors to protect itself from overstimulation. This biological process, known as downregulation, directly induces a state of social anhedonia. Because digital interactions simulate connection without triggering the actual biological releases of oxytocin or mirror neuron synchronization associated with physical proximity, the brain is conditioned to perceive physical socialization as an exhausting, low-reward activity. This neurological exhaustion has directly translated into historical drops in consumer behavior and domestic life. The National Center for Health Statistics reported that the United States fertility rate has dropped to 1.62 births per woman, well below the 2.1 replacement rate required to maintain a stable population. Simultaneously, the hobby and recreational retail sectors, which track discretionary spending on activities such as sports, gardening, crafting, and outdoor recreation, reported steady, consecutive declines in sales volume across all major categories between 2019 and 2025. Americans are not shifting their hobbies online. They are simply ceasing to pursue hobbies entirely. The final, most destructive symptom of this institutional vacuum is the escalating public health emergency surrounding deaths of despair. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention confirmed that annual deaths from suicide, alcohol-induced liver disease, and accidental drug overdoses have stabilized at a historic high of over 264,000 cases per year. The driving vector of this mortality rate remains synthetic opioids, specifically illegal fentanyl. Fentanyl has officially become the leading cause of death for American adults between the ages of 18 and 45, outstripping automobile accidents, cancer, and heart disease. In May 2023, the Office of the U.S. Surgeon General issued a formal public health advisory explicitly declaring loneliness and social isolation a national epidemic, comparing its mortality risk to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Despite this federal warning, subsequent budget allocations and legislative actions have failed to address the physical layout and economic realities that perpetuate the crisis. The corporate consolidation of retail, the elimination of public recreational space, the rising cost of basic survival, and the monetization of human attention have created a feedback loop that cannot be broken by individual willpower. The situation has reached an analytical dead end. The very mechanisms that generate corporate profitability in the modern economy are the exact mechanisms that require the systematic depletion of the population's cognitive and emotional capacity.